Good morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is Randy Iwasaki, and I'm going to serve as your MC today. I work for the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. We're an organization of 20 people. Many of them, the staff members, including me, are here today. If the people from the authority, the staff members, could you just wave your hand? I see Terry Ann in the back, Lindsay, Peter, Matt Kelly. They're going to help today. They'll be here carrying the microphones. I did say Terry Ann, Dave. Yes, she has the microphones. We're excited to be here, and I wanted to welcome you here today. This is our 4th year, and I think this is one of the best yet. And so hopefully you'll enjoy yourselves today. You'll learn a lot. Pass your business cards around and network as much as you can. Today we will learn from those who are taking the promise of Gomentum Station to the next level. People who, like I always say about our own team here at CCTA, are out to change the world. We have some amazing speakers here with us today and some of the most important elected officials as well. We could not do what we do without support from the elected officials, our board members, and we'll call them out individually in a moment. But first, I'd like to welcome Mayor Bill Clarkson from our beautiful host city, San Ramon. He was seen all over the United States on CBS National News.
Thank you, Randy. Welcome to San Ramon and welcome to Redefining Mobility Summit. You always like to know your audience. How many folks are here from out of state? Raise your hand. Good part of the room as you look around, a good part of the room. And I imagine you talk about networking. That'll be an important component that you do today. But welcome to the City of Innovation. Where what's going on today is not happening by chance. In fact, some of you, when you drove in, may have seen that beautiful new building that's being constructed. Did you all see that building? And that's the center or the start of our city center. In fact, it's a part of a 200-acre walking district that we're creating in the middle of this amazing business park and the park adjacent to it. Again, mobility isn't just automobiles, mobility around pedestrian and around vehicle traffic of walking everywhere, and so enjoy that. But the time I have with you briefly here is I really want to take a shout out to 2 people in particular, actually 3. First off is Randy Iwasaki, somebody whose leadership and innovation and willingness to take risks and work with a lot of electeds and bureaucracies and to put the needle or the thread through the needle to allow this to happen is really amazing, because a few weeks ago, for the first time in California, a driverless vehicle without brakes, without wheels, now the driver, went on public streets and returned. And so it's pretty neat. It's a long, arduous journey. I made the comment to a couple of folks that if it had been 120 years ago when flight was first being discovered, we'd still be with the biplane with today's regulatory environment. And so it's a difficult task to move forward. The other 2 is Alex and Alex Marin. And again, their leadership in the things that happened here at Bishop Ranch and the fact that they went out and purchased these vehicles, and they have been the leading and the driver of this technology of using driverless buses here in our city. And as a representative of the city of San Ramon, we envision the day when these small buses can carry up to 12, can go throughout our city on a frequent basis for very little money, because when you take the driver part out, it doesn't cost as much, and have the kind of mobility where people will not have to use their cars to come to our city center or to our schools or to our shopping and to their jobs, and how that fundamentally changes the cost of creating all this parking to take these cars that come to those venues. So thank you very much. I apologize I have to step back out. I have a tougher audience to go to next. At our new City Hall, we have a rotunda full of 3rd graders who are expecting both a tour, but more importantly, to be able to grill the mayor for half an hour on questions about the city. And if you think meeting reporters is tough, try meeting in front of 3rd graders with their very earnest questions about how things worked and why did you run for mayor? And these are tough questions to answer to 3rd graders who are very serious. So thank you very much and enjoy your day.
And now we welcome the chair of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, Supervisor Federal Glover.
Good morning. On behalf of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, I want to welcome you to the 4th annual Redefining Mobility Summit. Many of you have been with us since we kicked off the new era of innovation by launching Momentum Station, which it continues to be one-of-a-kind technology innovators and auto manufacturers to test out new ideas and enhance the safety of their products. Today, we come together to learn from those who are taking the promise of Momentum Station to the next level. People who, like our own executive director, Randy Iwasaki, that are out to change the world. The big theme for this year's event is how transportation is becoming more personalized as technology shifts the way that we think about our cars, our cities, our workplace, our jobs. Before we get started today, I want to acknowledge some very special people, elected leaders. Elected leaders make it possible for innovators to have a business-friendly regulatory environment and support funding for test beds like Momentum Station. Join me in thanking those elected officials who foster the private sector innovation. The summit would not be possible without the support from some very generous sponsors. So I'd like to personally thank all of the companies who are here helping to move into the future. And let's have a round of applause for all those great sponsors. As leaders in policy, public policy, transportation, technology, and research today, speakers together offer a complete picture of the changing landscape of our transportation network, and in fact, the fabric of our communities. Life in the 21st century will change in the coming years thanks to the work of the people with us today. Thank you all for being here. As chair of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, I am pledged to be able to help my region tackle some of the biggest challenges. We now have a world-class training facility located in Contra Costa County that attracts researchers and automatic manufacturers, technology companies, which helps the agencies stay on the cutting edge of transportation. As Randy likes to say, we are changing the world. Our team at CCTA look forward to working with each and every one of you as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Glover and Chairman of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority and holder of my future in your hands. Thank you. Really appreciate you being here today, sir. All right, so we talked a little bit about elected officials, so now we're going to the state level for a moment. And I'm introducing Assemblymember Catherine Baker. She represents the 16th District, but before she gets up here, let me just say, this is an Assembly member that has passed a piece of legislation that exempts us not from a wheel and a brake, but a steering wheel and a brake pedal and an operator to roll this technology out, the Easy Mile technology, into Alameda County. So please, Assemblymember Baker, thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, and good morning. Welcome to Assembly District 16. You are right in the heart of not just an innovation town, but an innovation valley, and we are very excited to have you here and excited for the story that there is to tell today and share with not only you, but all across the country and the world. In this valley, in this area, we have really been leading the way on technology and mobility. And you see that with GoMentum. When I was elected just a few years ago, and somebody first mentioned to me, we're already doing autonomous shuttles, we have test beds, and come out and see it, I thought, wow, we're really doing it, and you are. And what's amazing about it is the story isn't just about the technology that we're developing and testing here, it's how it is leading to expansion of that technology elsewhere and quickly. First, you saw GoMentum start and be a part of Contra Costa County at Concord Naval Weapons Station and here at Bishop Ranch. And we should be very, very thankful to Bishop Ranch leaders Alex and Alex Marin, the Alexes, if you don't mind me calling you that, and also to CCTA and others for bringing that here. But because we push innovation and we do this smarter testing here, it's like a seed that's growing. It's already expanded into the Tri-Valley area further. Soon, later this spring, I believe in May, we're going to have another test bed in the Dublin area that will allow us to be testing that first last mile connection on city streets with safe monitoring during that testing, where people can connect their neighborhoods and shops to a transit center like BART. That's exactly where we start to see the technology take off and really have an impact on lives. And that only happens not because of the elected leaders who are here and wonderful. We're part of that partnership, there's no question about it, but through you. Through leadership like Randy's and all of his team with CTTA who have worked on this, and the public-private partnerships that come from it. That is the only way this happens. And it's intentional. This isn't by accident that this all came about. It's sustained, intentional collaboration. It's our K through 12 schools and higher education coming together to make sure that we are leading a workforce who will be able to take on this technology and expand it. And then it's the government leaders who come in to try to collaborate and support. And sometimes it's getting some of the obstacles out of the way in government. We should all take a Hippocratic oath to do no harm. And that's an important part. But very, very grateful to the work of GoMentum, everyone who's been behind it, and seen the results already in our community as it expands. And if you're not from California and you're here today visiting, know that we are very excited to be leaders in the state and the country for this technology. Come to California, move here, be part of growing this even further, because we'd love to see these jobs here and expanding. And finally, thank you for being involved in this industry and this technology. It's not just about making it easier to get to and from work or to and from our errands and other parts of life. It's not just about the mobility of transportation. Mobility and innovation and expanding our access to one another is about having more fulfilling lives for everyone of every ability. And that's what you are a part of as you take what you're learning today and networking today and spread it out and continue to let it grow. I'm eager to continue being a part of that. Thank you for coming to Assembly District 16. There's more work to do, and enjoy the day doing it. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is State Senator Steve Glazier. He represents the 7th District. He's a very strong tech advocate, and he loves bringing jobs to this area, and he's doing a fantastic job for us. Senator Glazier, thank you.
Well, thank you, Randy. Thank you to CCTA, Bishop Ranch, the Marins, and certainly my elected colleagues who support the good work that you're all a part of. You know, when we think about mobility technology, there's the common things that come to mind, like making life better for people. And then there's the disruption that it does create in terms of how we look at how we plan our cities and our counties, and where parking and transportation are going to change and how they fit into these choices that we're going to make going forward to make our communities great places. But the third area that people don't think a lot about or talk a lot about, but is a very compelling one to me, is how it makes California competitive in the world economy. If you were to take California as a population of the world, we'd rank around 35th. But if you look at our GDP, it would rank us around 6th in the world. Now, why is that? Well, is it our wonderful weather, our beaches, our mountains, Yosemite? There's a lot of things that we love about our state. But there's a lot more to it than just our natural assets that we bring to the table. It's our education system. It's our higher education system. It's the research and development that we promote and encourage. It's our technology sector that is using innovation to make California a place to be at so many different levels. But that doesn't come easily because there are a lot of folks that don't want to see change. They don't want innovation. It sounds kind of crazy even to say it out loud. But look, if you were to ask, what's the most common occupation in the United States of America, certainly in California, the answer is people who drive. Truck drivers, bus drivers, taxi drivers. That is the #1 employment sector in our country. And yet we're talking about this type of technology that it has the potential to be incredibly, incredibly disruptive and impact a lot of people and their jobs. In fact, we had a bill that passed the legislature this past year that said, as a condition of giving hundreds of millions of dollars out to our ports, that you could not use that money for any automation. Think about that. We banned the use of any of our public money for automation. It's crazy, huh? Government stopping innovation. It's not just, as Assemblywoman Baker said, government getting out of the way and not over-regulating innovation. But now government can be involved in saying we don't want to support it. In fact, we're banning it. And think about how that might have played out in our past. We'd still have the covered wagons. We'd still have typewriters, right? Because of all the clerical staff that would be impacted by innovation. So there's a big power force in our state that doesn't want these enhanced innovations and this enhanced technology. And so while we praise, and I certainly join in praising our elected leaders who are here and who are supportive, understand that there are very powerful forces that don't want any of this really to happen. And so it requires us to be aware, not just because we know how it can change lives and improve people's quality of life, but how it can make our state and our country competitive in the global world out there that want to take those innovations and make them happen at their ports and in their cities and take those good paying jobs and move them to their parts of the world and not here. So this is exciting, what you're talking about today and what you're involved in, but there is also many challenges and hurdles out there in our ability to bring it to the marketplace. And it's worth noting. It is disruptive technology, but with an investment in our education system and investment in job training, we can overcome the disruption in our workforce, I think, fairly easily. But it requires a collective effort that I know you will all be a part of and supportive of as we go forward. And I wish you a wonderful day of education, learning, and contributions. And thank you for coming to the 7th Senate District.
Okay, last but not least, now we're going back to the county level, and we're going to have a few words from our supervisor, Candace Anderson. And as she's walking up, she's always very tech-focused because some of her kids actually work in the tech industry. So it's very difficult for me to have to compete with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors, I want to welcome you not only to Contra Costa, but to District 2. I represent District 2, which is San Ramon, Danville, Alamo, a corner of Walnut Creek, Lafayette, Moraga, and Orinda. And I'm excited to have another Mobility Summit here in San Ramon at Bishop Ranch. The Barons Sunset Development have been fabulous partners, a true example of public-private partnerships that are doing things well beyond the box. Now, as Randy mentioned, I have a few children, and in fact, I have 6 millennials. And my millennials are true examples of what we are doing with mobility as a service. Some live in a city and don't own a car. They Uber, Lyft throughout Chicago, hop on the train. If they want to go somewhere, they rent a car if they need to go further than beyond the city limits. Another lives in San Francisco, and while they own a car, my daughter walks and generally Ubers wherever she goes rather than using their car. Their car's primary location is sitting in a garage. Now, some in the suburbs tend to use their cars a little bit more, but I'm seeing a continual shift. So as a mother, particularly when I'm traveling in a city with them, or even now on my own, they've trained me well to use my Uber and Lyft apps. I find this technology so amazingly convenient. As a daughter of 87 and 88-year-old parents who live alone in Hawaii in the same house I grew up in, I'm seeing the benefits of technology. I've been with my 88-year-old father when he has suddenly stopped on the freeway where in an older vehicle we would most certainly would have flown into the car in front of us. Fortunately, with technology, we stopped immediately. As he's getting closer to no longer driving, I'm excited about the opportunities, how I may be able from my home or office in California, summon a car for him on my app to come pick him up because he's not so technologically adept anymore in his older years. As an elected official, I've got a transportation nightmare out on 680, and it's one where in the evening commute, it's just a very, very slow crawl. In the morning commute coming this way, it is the same. And it's something that we are trying many, many different angles of attack to really address it, but technology to me is going to be the solution. So I look forward to being here while I can this morning and all of you coming up with the great ideas to solve all of our problems. So thank you and welcome to Contra Costa.
Now you know why we do what we do, is we have the elected officials that are always taking a look at what we're doing, so we appreciate that. Let's see what's next. So please join me in thanking our elected officials who are helping here to foster the private sector's innovation. The summit would not be possible today without the support of some very generous sponsors. And so I'd like to personally thank, and I'm going to just say them in order, and if you like one or the other, go ahead and clap, but you can wait to the end if you want this thing to go pretty smoothly here. So the first one is Stantec, Easy Mile, Bishop Ranch, and Sunset Development. The Marins were mentioned a couple of times, but we could not do this without them. They're private sector, but they're really sponsoring a lot of the things that we need to be sponsored in order to move these projects forward. AAA of Northern California, Bay Area Air Quality Management District, HDR. Amber Mobility, Best Mile, Crown Castle, DKS, Econolite, First Transit, 5 Points, Grid Smart, Kimley Horn, Michael Baker International, Newmark Knight Frank, Quincy Engineering, Schrader Lighting, State Street Funding, Telegra, Transportation Research Board, TY Lin International, and 3M. Please give them a round of applause. We also have several partners who are helping us bring demonstrations to you today, so you get to actually experience live some of these technologies. AJ Designs, visualization, Baidu, Honda, Easy Mile, and SAIC. So at lunch, go out and take a look at the demonstrations. We encourage you to spend some time with them today and learn more about their technology by getting up close and personal with it during the breaks. As leaders in public policy, transportation technology, and research, today's speakers together offer a complete picture of the changing landscape of our transportation network and, in fact, the very fabric of our communities. Life in the 21st century will change in the coming years thanks to the work of all the people here today. So we really thank you, all of you. Thank you very much. I have a long speech here that I was supposed to give, but I'm going to cut that out. So I am just thrilled, and let me give you some housekeeping notes first out of the way. First, if you have not already, please go to the App Store and download our app. We get $5 for every app you download, so that's, we're trying to balance our budget. That's really not true, I'm just joking. And it's a very stylish conference app, by the way. It has full bios for all of our speakers, a list of attendees and sponsors, and other cool features that you can only get there and will help you get the most out of our time to together today. And if you're tweeting, which I like to do every now and again, please use the conference hashtag RMS 2018. And be sure to follow the Momentum station for live tweeting from this event. And like last year, we will have a little fun with this just poll everywhere. And hopefully you will remember how this works from last year, but in case you don't, we've got a little test for you now. In that handy dandy mobile app that you just got, click Poll Everywhere. There are a few options for using Poll Everywhere, and they're on your handout sheet. I'm supposed to hold this up here, apparently, to my notes. Okay? And on the screen behind me, I guess there, I don't see anything on Poll Everywhere yet. Now, in a minute, our first question is going to go live, and you all are going to see the responses in real time. So that should be a lot of fun. At least it was last year. Okay, are you all ready? Is everybody ready?
Do you have to sign in first?
I think so. I don't know. I'm not a tech guy. I am pausing like it says here. Okay. I assume you've all, does everybody have, how many of you don't have the app downloaded? Wow, and you guys are tech people. How are we doing? Anybody need help? Poll Everywhere is supposed to be on your app. It's under social media. It's under social media. See how we help each other here? This is teamwork. Okay, for those of you that have it, I am going to give the question now. What do you think will become commonplace most quickly? A, people owning driverless cars. B, people using driverless shuttles like the Easy Mile shuttle in our parking lot here at Bishop Ranch to get from home or work to a transit hub. Or C, driverless trucks carrying freight down the highway. I mean, we've already delivered 17,452 cases of Budweiser beer down the 25 in Colorado. So I'll give you a few minutes to get your questions in, and hopefully something pops up behind me here. And then we'll close the poll. Very nice. Okay. I think the answer to this question outside of this room would be a little bit different. You're all very tech savvy and you have a very clear vision of how you see the future. But I think what we're doing together is very crucial. We've got to get the word out. We need the public to get on board with bringing driverless vehicles to our roads. You're all aware that the tragedy that happened a few weeks ago, or last week, where a pedestrian crossing in the dark was in an unmarked crosswalk, basically a mid-block crossing, was hit and killed by a self-driving car. The headlines were everywhere, but in over 1 million miles driven by self-driving cars, this is the first fatality involving a pedestrian. Self-driving cars are being held to a higher standard, and that is the kind of incident that can derail all the progress that has been making in the past several years. And not to lessen this tragedy in any way, because obviously this is exactly why we are working so feverishly to make self-driving cars safe for all to use and safe to be a pedestrian or bicyclist near one. But last year alone, there were 20 fatal accidents involving pedestrians in San Francisco. Many of those barely registered a blip in the media. Traffic fatalities rose by 43% in the Bay Area from 2010 to 2016. And self-driving cars promise to help us reduce that number. This technology, in my opinion, is the only technology on the planet today that will put that fatality rate in the right direction. That's heading down. Today, we are very fortunate to have our keynote speaker, Dr. Susan Shaheen, the co-director of Berkeley's Transportation Sustainability Research Center and director of Innovative Mobility Research. An internationally recognized leader in innovative mobility research, Susan continues to focus on car sharing, as well as several other areas, including bike sharing and ride sharing, eco-driving for private vehicles and freight, smart parking management. We actually worked on a smart parking project maybe 15 years ago for transit and trucks, fuel cell, electric, and plug-in hybrid vehicles and infrastructure, smart growth, development, and older mobility. Susan has a PhD in ecology, focusing on the energy and environmental aspects of transportation from UC Davis, and an MS, Master of Science in Public Policy Analysis from the University of Rochester. After completing her master's degree, she worked as a consultant to the U.S. Department of Energy and the EPA in Washington, D.C. From 2000 to 2001, she was a postdoc researcher at UC Berkeley. Oh, you have a long bio here. Well, let me just finish it by saying she and I worked together at Caltrans in 2003. Susan, please come on up. Thank you very much.
Hold on a second, I'm coming over. All right, I gotta get fixed up here for a sec. I couldn't get this to work when I was sitting down. Okay, all right. Good morning, everyone. So thank you, Randy, for that great introduction. I wasn't expecting you to read my full bio. That would have taken a while. So I'm really happy to be here. I am actually a resident of Contra Costa County. I moved to Orinda about 18 months ago, so welcome to Contra Costa County. And today I want to talk to you about the future of shared mobility. So I understand a lot of you feel pretty comfortable with the concept of shared mobility, is that right? So how many of you feel like you know what shared mobility is? Show of hands? Okay, all right. So we're going to do a little bit of prep work then. But before we do that, I think a lot about shared mobility. I've been working on it for over 2 decades, and I think we've reached a time that's kind of scary and kind of fun and very, very interesting, I think, for those of us in transportation. But at this time, I think change is coming so fast and there's so much uncertainty that we don't truly understand exactly what we're doing and what those implications of what we're doing might be. And I'd like to challenge everybody to think bold and to be brave as you think about policy making in whatever part of the world you're living in, working in, because I do think that change is coming far faster than we ever predicted. And I continue to see evidence of it every day, just looking at the media and going to Silicon Valley and seeing all of the change that's coming. So I think we need to be careful and we need to work together. We need to form new types of partnerships that we haven't had before. And I think we need to think about public transportation in a whole new way. So my talk today is going to talk largely about the future. But I think before we do that, I want to spend a moment on the basics of shared mobility. So I don't know if any of you have ever seen this ecosystem diagram, but this is something we put together for the US Department of Transportation. And essentially on the left-hand side, you see all of the forms of shared mobility that you probably are quite comfortable with. And what I want to note is that we have consciously stated that public transit, car rental, paratransit services, jitney services, shuttles and taxis, pedicabs, they are all part of this larger concept of shared mobility. So we don't think just the high-tech stuff over there in the Venn diagram over to the right is just shared mobility, but is this larger ecosystem. And to the right, you can see a whole list of shared mobility options, some of which you might be very comfortable with and have a lot of familiarity with, some that you have less familiarity with. But that list does seem to be intact, but what we continually see developments in each of the sectors. For example, bike sharing, this is changing dramatically just within the last 12 months. We have dockless bike sharing systems coming online all over the world, really disrupting what we knew as station-based bike sharing systems in a substantive way. Here in California, we're watching Bird come online, essentially push scooters that are infiltrating our cities and disrupting our public policies. I understand they're being seen in both Oakland and San Francisco. As I predicted, they first appeared in LA, Santa Monica area, And that's going to continue. And you can see scooter sharing at the bottom. But when we originally developed this ecosystem diagram, scooter sharing was a scooter that you sat on, not a push scooter that you rode on, that was dockless and distributed via smart technology. In the middle, you see carpooling, van pooling, and casual carpooling. And the reason we place them there is that they are also undergoing a bit of an IT renaissance. So we are starting to see information technology applied in that case. And then this is the standard definition. And essentially, what I think is really important to understand about shared mobility and what my research has shown over the last 2 decades is essentially what we're doing is we're taking a fixed cost, auto ownership, and we're turning it into a variable or marginal cost. And it's allowing people to really understand those true costs of their transportation system. And if you can decouple someone from auto ownership and those fixed costs, we often see a lot of change in the behavior that's associated with trip making. So in this next slide, I thought what we would do, because we do have a lot of research to talk about at UC Berkeley on this, is to just highlight a number of the studies that have been coming out in the area of ride sourcing. And that's a platform that's used to source rides. That's terminology that we coined in 2014 to describe what many call transportation network companies. We are very conscious not to use the term ride sharing because those services are not incidental trips. They are commercial trips, and they are associated with a lot of different types of insurance policies. So we're careful not to use the term ride sharing in that context, even when those services are pooled, because it's still a commercial transaction. But what I wanted to note here for you is that there are modal shift effects happening as a result of these services, and we heard a little bit about that in some of the introductory comments. And what you can see is across these studies, based on their level of aggregation or their focus on a specific city. For example, the first study here, which is one that we led here at UC Berkeley, in San Francisco, shows that these services are primarily competing with taxi. And public transit at about 33 percentage points, depending on how you look at it, but here how I've diced it is 30%. And then a 7% competition with auto driving. But then when we look at a more recent study that just came out of Boston, what we see is also a pretty dense city that is seeing very high levels of transit competition at about 42%, lower levels of taxi competition at about 23%, and about 18% of an effect on driving. Now, what you can see is there's a 3-year difference in terms of when those studies were conducted. And then we also see studies that have different ranges. In smaller cities or medium-sized cities like Denver, Boulder, you can see the impacts here. You see a bigger bite being taken out of private driving in this particular case. And also when we look at the Austin study, we see about 45%. So what I think this means, and that's a really important takeaway, besides the research being different and all the methodological differences, which I note down here, right, is that the spatial environment affects how these behaviors are changing, right? And then when we look at studies that are aggregated at a higher level, it's much more difficult when you take 7 cities and you aggregate them up to understand what those spatial effects are. So again, the big takeaway for you is when you're placing these shared automated vehicle systems in an environment, they could have vastly different effects based on the land use and built environment and the population in which you're deploying them, okay? So I think what we're here to talk about today is what we've been calling for a long time the convergence. And this is the convergence with everything from mobile IT technology to electrification to automation and shared mobility. And this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately because a lot of people talk about this almost like it's a magic bullet. Do you guys feel like that? Like suddenly if this would all come together, then all our problems would be solved. Do you guys feel like that? I certainly do. I read a lot of the hype associated with this. And so what I want to do is challenge that assumption just a little bit. It's not that I'm not all for technology. But before I get into my big challenge, I do want to talk about the growth of all of this. So just in California alone, we've got 50 companies, and that's growing, that are registered, right? to test their automated vehicles. And we're seeing more and more fleet-based solutions. You can see a picture of Waymo here. Whoops. Sorry, I'm just getting used to using this clicker. I don't know. Can I go backward? No, it looks like I can only go forward. Is that right? No? Nope. There we go. Sorry. Just takes a minute to get used to new technology up here. Okay. So here's the Waymo system that they're testing in several cities now. But this is an interesting diagram here, figure from Bloomberg, which just shows all of these different relationships that are emerging around this particular space. And essentially you see the automakers playing, you see the tech companies playing, and you see the mobility providers playing. You know what I mean by that, I think. You know, the Lyfts and the Ubers, the Vias, the Chariots, the gig cars, because I see Jason here, a one-way car sharing systems playing in this space. And then we also see what's really interesting, in addition to these mergers, acquisitions, investments, strategies, we also see personnel moving from company to company, and this just changing of this mindset towards moving forward with automation and shared automation. So it's coming super, super fast. SAV pilot development. So we've been tracking this pretty closely for a while. And right now, what we're at is about 17 total pilots, with 5 operating on roads. And as you know, Easy Mile will be on real roads very shortly, which will bring us up to 6. But essentially, we see 2 categories of these shared automated pilot systems. So we see the conventional, which is essentially using a conventional vehicle, and then the low-speed automated shuttle. And I've even got little Easy Mile here from Contra Costa County pictured here that falls into category 1. So with these pilots, we see quite a few of them. We see the conventional systems, and these are several examples. You've already seen a picture of Early Rider, which is the Waymo system. We have Uber's system, and as Randy mentioned, we had a very unfortunate fatality occur in Tempe, Arizona, so that program has been put on hold for testing. And we also see Nutonomy and Lyft partnering, and they've started deployment in the Boston Seaport area of Massachusetts. So there's a lot of this conventional work going on. And then we see many low-speed shared automated vehicle developments, including here, Bishop Branch, where we are today. We see these developments in the University of Michigan at M-City and in Santa Clara University, also in Northern California. So there's a lot of activity, but when you're thinking about it, it does fall into sort of 2 categories, these conventional vehicles, like sedans, as well as the low-speed shuttles. So this is the cautionary tale that I want to bring into this keynote, is to talk about that magic bullet that I mentioned early on. Is I really do think that before we get too excited about solving all problems with transportation problems, with this convergence of all of these different technological approaches, I do think we need to take a moment to think about how shared mobility and transportation equity are interfacing today. And this is just a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. I think it's really important that we take a moment when we're getting really excited about tech to think about what really matters, and that what we're seeing in our nation and across the world today is a very, very big divide. And that divide, I think, is going to get quite a bit larger. So we spent about 18 months working with the U.S. Department of Transportation on a study that we just released that focuses on this topic. And one of the first things that we thought a lot about was, what is this divide that is potentially making it really difficult for people to benefit from shared mobility? And ultimately, we developed this figure to characterize it. And you're probably familiar with the idea of sociodemographic issues, everything from age to disability factors to literacy factors, right? You're probably also very familiar with the idea of economics, people who might be banked or unbanked or underbanked, people who live in poverty, and just the overall economics of that situation. But other factors that I think we need to take into consideration as we're planning for SAVs is cultural issues. There's a lot of people out there that have different cultural perceptions. Some people may not want to get into a car with a stranger, or because there's a language barrier, they're just not comfortable using an app or getting in a car with somebody who speaks another language. There's many different issues that we need to take into consideration as we try to cross this divide from a cultural standpoint. From a mind standpoint, we also need to think very carefully about motivation. So some people are very fearful of technology, and they may just not have the motivation to go get a smartphone and to start downloading apps and to start using those. So that approach towards introducing people to shared mobility and to shared automated vehicle technology, I think, is really important. And I'm going to bring some data in to suggest to you why this is so important. And then this is a factor that I've already indicated to you in existing studies on ride sourcing, that we need to be really careful when we think about what kind of impacts these systems are going to have based on the geospatial environment in which we're going to deploy these services. Is it a rural environment? Is it an urban core environment? Do we have all of the pieces in place, and do we understand what options are going to be best in those environments? Equity challenges range, as I've noted, everything from smartphones to banking access, to ability to afford these technologies. What happens when Lyft and Uber stop subsidizing the rides and the cost of the rides start to go up and they start to reflect the true costs? Well, there may be a long period of time before automation comes in to decrease those costs. What are those people going to do? And are we still going to have public transportation systems and the goodwill and support of taxpayers to subsidize public transit at that point in time? Low income and minority neighborhoods, there may just be a lack of service availability there. There are places where Uber and Lyft drivers, for example, and taxi drivers do not want to go because they're crime-ridden. And then, of course, there's people with disabilities. And this is the American Disability Act, right? How do we make sure people who need wheelchair-accessible vehicles or who need translation services because they're blind or hearing impaired, that they are getting that same equivalent of service? This data is basically a compilation of work we've done over the last decade at UC Berkeley. And what I'm showing you here is everything from round-trip car sharing at the top down to microtransit. We did a study with Kansas City when they did the Kansas City Bridge project, right? And what does this show you from a socioeconomic standpoint? Well, I'll tell you that most of the users are Caucasian. Most of the users are higher income. In fact, earnings are anywhere, whoops, sorry, I'm getting used to this deck here, or this clicker. 6% are less than 35K, up to about 26%. So people are not using these services who are from lower incomes. And you can also see that the dominant users are Caucasian users. And finally, they're super well educated. Look at this, everywhere from 100% with a 4-year degree and the lower end to about 55% with our research on bike sharing. So we have a gap, and that gap is potentially going to continue to increase. So here's a framework that we developed along with USDOT to help us think about how to bridge this gap and keep this in mind as we move towards shared automated vehicle systems. And it's called STEPS. And it stands for spatial, temporal, economic, physical, and social. And so when we're thinking about deploying shared automated vehicles, we really do need to think about these spatial factors, which can really compromise people's ability to travel in terms of their lack of public transit or great walking distances for transit. And so what we thought was there's some really great opportunities for us to take shared mobility options and help fill a lot of these gaps that we see in areas like Contra Costa County, right? Public transit I'm so sorry. I'm used to lecturing with my own clicker, and I keep clicking in the wrong place because that's where it is on my own personal clicker. Public transit operators and ride sourcing for first and last mile partnerships. In fact, there's one out here in the Dublin area called Go Dublin that's doing just that. And then we're also looking at services like microtransit, like Via and Chariot, as transit replacement or also to fill gaps. So how can these services fill particular needs based on spatial scale? Temporal issues. So time of day does matter. And a lot of people have difficulty finding transportation options, for example, late at night. So opportunities might exist for providing late night transportation. We might also, again, think about providing downsized on-demand transit services like microtransit, and we might also start to really focus on augmenting these casual carpooling services or services like Scoop that are really focused on enterprise or business-focused carpooling to really get people through congested periods of time. But time of travel does make a difference, and some people are not traveling at typical times of day. Economics, I think I've already talked a fair amount about this. There's both direct costs, but there's also indirect costs of transportation. Everything from needing a smartphone to a credit card to internet access or being able to use those services. So how do these economic issues affect people's ability to use shared mobility? We might really need to start thinking about subsidies for low income and providing multiple payment options for shared mobility service providers, making it easier for people to do this without a credit card. And then also creating multimodal hubs, working on a couple projects in the city of Oakland around mobility hubs there to really provide Wi-Fi access and both virtual and physical mobility to people. Physiological aspects, I think these are a little bit more intuitive to us when we think about equity, but these are the barriers that many citizens face. These are everything from infants to older adults to disabled people, and how can we use shared mobility to fix those gaps? And coming up with apps that are voice activated or, again, I'm sorry, my apologies. I wish I could get this down. By the time I finish this, I will have this clicker down. Voice-activated mobility apps. This is something that I think would be fabulous for people who suffer from visual impairments. And then finally, these social, cultural, safety issues really do need to be sorted out. There's a study that shows that women are not treated as fairly on ride-sourcing apps as men. There's a study that shows that people with African-sounding names are not treated as fairly on apps. And there's also studies that indicate that when people are requesting rides from crime-ridden areas, that they don't get equivalent access and service. So how can we use these apps to help minimize sociodemographic profiling? This is, I think, something that we really have to do. We have to do more outreach to low-income individuals and minorities, and we do have to start dealing with language barriers. These are significant issues. So what we should really be achieving here, I believe, is equivalent access. And that is essentially taking two neighborhoods with similar environments, built environments and densities, and essentially allowing them to have that same level of access. And if we're not doing that, we're failing. And examples of this means that they're going to have the same transportation modes, they're going to have the same hours and frequencies of service, and they're going to have comparable wait times. So we've got a lot of work to do in order to get to this. So I think in terms of policy questions that I want to leave you with, I would categorize these as the 3 Ds. And so I came up with this way of sort of making this simple, is how do we deal with the divide? And in that divide, I also want to remind us that it's not just equivalent access that I'm talking about here, but I'm also talking about an even playing field for operators. Do we want to end up with a monopoly or a duopoly? And what does that mean for equivalent service and quality of service? So how do we make it possible for new players to come into the shared mobility ecosystem and play? In terms of discrimination, how do we prevent protected classes from suffering discrimination on these apps? And displacement. How do we make all shared modes affordable and accessible to low-income individuals and digitally impoverished? And further, how do we make sure that we don't fully eliminate public transit services and find that now people don't even have an access mode to get around? This is the volume that I'm talking about in which we convey all of these ideas, and this is available through the Federal Highway Administration. I welcome you to download it. We spent a lot of time thinking about this. And before I wrap up, I just want to say that I think there are so many opportunities here. So many opportunities for us to do the right thing and to make public transit better, and to create a public transportation renaissance. We can create more first mile, last mile connections. We can essentially replace inefficient routes, which is what Go Dublin is starting to look at. And we can also add services because we can bring them in temporarily when we need them. We can add late night transportation. We can really blow out paratransit, which has historically very, very high costs. We can bring those down dramatically. And there's many, many other opportunities. But we have to work together on all of these solutions. And we've got to fix these equity problems because I don't think tech is going to do that for us. That's going to be us working really hard together. So these are just some concluding thoughts. You know, AVs, I think if shared, are really going to blur that line between what is public and what is private. And SAVs could really help us to achieve efficient and affordable public transportation that can really help us get to jobs and to healthcare and to all the other things that we want to do. But we've got to really work hard on this. And the first mile, last mile piece, I think, is one of the most exciting. I did my doctoral dissertation on that work, and I continue to work hard towards that. And I think we've got to really try to figure out how to bridge those gaps between our precious rail lines so people really do use those for those long distance portions of their travel. Cities and sites are very, very different. So when you look at these studies, don't presume that you're going to get the same behavioral effects, vehicle mile travel reductions, greenhouse gas emission reductions, or auto sale reductions. Right? Every location is different, and we need to be really careful about crafting our policies to tailor to a whole range of different technical, social, and legal contexts. And SAV policies will need to consider and mitigate for adverse effects, everything from latent demand to safety, to congestion, to equity, and to sprawl. So we've got to take all of this into account. So I'm glad we've got policymakers here because we really do need to be thoughtful in our policymaking as we sort through this. But I think this is an exciting event. I just want you to keep equity in mind in everything you do. And I think we'll be off to a great start here with the Easy Mile project. So before I leave you and dash back to UC Berkeley, just wanted to let you know that we do provide tons of free resources. We do not charge for the majority of these, so feel free to subscribe to our weekly newsletter, and you'll get all sorts of things. This is what the newsletter actually looks like, and you can get access to a lot of the reports we put out with the latest and greatest. This is our latest car sharing outlook that has the latest numbers, includes peer-to-peer car sharing, by the way, never been reported before. And then these are other resources. I'm delighted to tell you that we just got APA to remove the $35 fee for this, so you can now get this Planning for Shared Mobility report for free. And we also have a basic primer and a smartphone app primer for you. And if that's not enough, we just authored a paper with our folks from Caltrans on the future of mobility that is intended to help with the California Transportation Plan 2050. So we've got a lot of cool, funky stuff in there, like Hyperloop and flying cars, all that kind of good stuff, vertical takeoff and landing. And these are two other documents, including a book I co-edited. So with that, I'd love to thank you for your time and attention, and I hope you're inspired to make shared mobility equitable and accessible for everybody, and enjoy the event. Thank you.